Welcome back, friends. This is part two of our castle silhouette shaker. We've poured our resin mixture to make our base, and 48 hours later, we can come back and find this perfect mold. So just as a reminder, this is what our final design will look like. So once we have that base, what we're going to do is go ahead and start to drill our little hole so that when we put the guts in this base, we can put our baby oil in and secure it through the ear. I like to do it this way just because I find that when I do put it through the ear, I get less air bubbles inside. I used to put mine at the bottom of the base, but it's really up to you where you want to put this. It doesn't really matter. I like to put it in the ear. I just feel like it's less noticeable. So I got this little drill on Amazon. I think you can find them in your local craft store as well. I go about, I don't know, a quarter of the way up the side there. You can see I go through multiple times, just making sure that all of the debris is cleared up from the area of the hole so that when I am putting the baby oil in, I'm not getting any of the residue inside of my design. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab some of our transparency paper. I do sell this type in my store. I find that it works the best. I did go through multiple different types until I found the one that I like to use. And I'll put a link to where you can find it in my shop at the bottom of the comments. We're going to lay that flat, go ahead and trace, and then you're going to cut out that little pattern piece that you've just made with your paper. You want to cut just on the inside of your line. So the key here is that when you cut this out, you do not want your film to reach the edges of your base. So it should be somewhere in the middle, and I know that's a really small area to work with. But it's important because if you go over, what can happen when we do our seal is it'll chip off. And then if you go under and your film is too short, and kind of rests in the middle of the base, what'll happen is obviously your oil's going to leak out. So you just kind of adjust it here as much as you can to where it fits directly in the center kind of your groove. You can see, I'm going to try to do a little close up here. You can see that my film is in the middle of that groove all the way around. So it's not reaching the edge and it's not too short and going into the base. And if it is, just cut it down a little bit. So if it does overlap for some reason, you have too much in one area, just go ahead and cut it down a sliver until you get to the desired size. Next, we're going to take our glitter. So I love these glitters. This is a really pretty design when it's done. We've got our med cups, our baby oil, and this UV resin I get at the local craft store. I've got my mixers and my UV heating lamp. I ended up getting this off Amazon as well, just because the one in the craft store just wasn't, the wattage wasn't nearly enough to actually make my resin hard, which is obviously the whole point of this. So I'm trying to find the glitter I used in my other design, but I think I might have ran out of it. So let's go ahead and put these purple Mickey heads in. We'll put these two heart charms in. These I find in the craft store. You can just find them in the bead area. And then what I would argue is most important in my designs, because I like a lot of movement in my pieces, is these bubble beads. I like to use these just because they're heavy enough to move around my glitter. Sometimes if you don't put some heavier pieces into your shakers, what'll happen is your glitter just won't move in the baby oil. It just does not move around and you don't get that desired effect that you want. So I like to use these bubble beads. Let's see. So I generally put in my lighter glitter and things first, mainly because if you put your film on top of your glitter, sometimes what'll happen is the static between the two will raise all of your glitter to your shaker paper, and sometimes it never comes off. So I like to kind of put my glitter down first, and then I'll put my heavier items like my bubble beads on top, just as in effect a weight to hold those down. This is what I call adding the guts. So I'm going to go ahead and put everything in to the base there. Those are the bubble beads that we're going to use today. And I I don't know. I also like to see a lot of movement in my shaker, like I mentioned, and I don't like to fill it so much that you can't see things float around. So I tend to not overdo it with the guts, but I like enough that I can tell there's stuff floating around inside and make the colors pretty. Add a little bit more of this iridescent. And then what I'm going to do is just take my UV resin and I'm going to go around the edges here of the mold or the base that we have. And this is just a thin layer. I'm just going to go around. It's okay if it gets over the side a little bit, but try to keep it just in that one groove. I'm going to clear off my paper here and just lay it on top of that. And then I'm going to take one of my little toothpicks or string sticks and just kind of press it around the edges to make sure that that is fully set up against the mold. I want to make sure that there's no little air pockets or anything where I could have seepage later. While that's cooking, we're going to leave it under there for 2 60-second turns. While that is cooking, what I'm going to do is start mixing up my resin for the top layer of this design. So this is the resin I like to use. I know I've mentioned it before. It's something I get off Amazon. And I just find that it has the least amount of bubbles that form, and it gives a real glass clear effect, which is obviously what we want when we're making a shaker. So I like to use this and I just go ahead and whip it up while my design is cooking there. This resin is a 1-to-1 ratio, and we are not going to need much at all because we're just going to pour enough over the top of that film. We want to make sure that we get it secured onto that base piece. Okay, by the time that is done cooking, what I'm going to do is go ahead and take my UV resin again, and I'm going to go over the top of the portion that we've just secured down. This is just around the edges, and I just like to make sure that there's no ability for any of the baby oil that we're going to put inside of this design to seep out. So I'm going to put another real thin layer over the top of that transparency film, and I'm just going to go ahead and go all the way around, making sure that I've got it clear up to all of the edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and cook it again for another 2 turns. Now we can finish up stirring our resin together and set that aside. Once that is done and you've added your second layer of UV resin to the top of that film, we can take it out, and now you can see that all of our glitter is secure in there, and we can start adding in our baby oil. I like to use baby oil. I think it's a little thicker than water. It doesn't evaporate. I like that aspect. It's longevity. I found this little bottle. It was actually first used for, or supposed to be used for, henna tattooing. And I just thought the needle nose on it would work perfectly for fitting into those little tiny drilled holes. And guess what? It does. So get you a henna tattoo bottle. If you spill over the sides, just go ahead and wipe it off with a rag, but make sure that you do get as much oil off of your piece as you can before you put resin in it again. When you're content, go ahead and top it off with a little UV resin down into your hole and put it under your UV lamp. I do this for probably just 1 to 2 turns again. It doesn't take very long because this is a really small area for this to heat up and dry. Lastly, for this is to add our thin top layer of resin. So once that's done cooking, you can see that this is perfect. This is a perfect base for our shaker. Everything's moving around really well. The colors work really well together. Nothing is leaking. I like to give it a little turn just to make sure no oil's coming out of it at this point. And then I am going to top it off with my resin that I had set aside. So I'm going to pour a thin layer of that over the top, coating the edges, coating the film, and just making sure that it goes up over the edges of that UV resin that we used earlier. We want to make sure that that's all coated and covered with this new resin. What you're really trying to do is just secure this resin to your base resin. And at this point, we have 3 different resins in this design. We have our UV resin, our shaker base resin, which is the sturdier resin I like to use for bases, and then we have this top coat resin that I like to use just for the clear coating of things because I feel like it gives it a nice shine. So once we're all finished with this, we can go ahead. I'm going to torch it one more time just because I want to make sure any little bubbles that are left over are gone. But we're going to go ahead and set this aside and we're going to leave it for 48 hours, come back, and we'll do part 3. We'll add our castle silhouette and our double seal. Okay, thanks guys. See you soon.